Good afternoon, everyone. Again, finding your seats. Today, we are so lucky to have with us Dr. Mark Leary from Duke University to discuss overreactions to trivial events. Why do some people sometimes lose it over minor things? At Duke, he is a professor of psychology and neuroscience, in addition to being the director of the Interdisciplinary Behavioral Research Center. Dr. Leary received his bachelor's from West Virginia Wesleyan and his Ph.D. in social psychology from the University of Florida. He has published on a myriad of topics, including self-compassion, emotional regulation, sociotropic differentiation, and the role that status plays in determining social value, just to name a few. To cite one tidbit of trivia about Dr. Leary, the worst fight he ever had with his brother growing up, to quote, is a tie between the time he shot me in the back with a BB gun and the time he threw an axe at me. I don't remember what either incident was about, but I'm sure that neither one was my fault. I'm guessing this is what prompted the investigation into overreacting to trivial events. Maybe. If you're interested in more trivia, there is plenty on his Duke webpage, and it is all awesome. More recently, Dr. Leary has released a DVD collection, Understanding the Mysteries of Human Behavior, and has been elected president of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology for 2015. Everyone, please help me in welcoming Dr. Mark Leary.
Thank you, Keith. I'm hoping that I can project and stand out here and not have to use the microphone. Can you hear me okay in the back? Everybody all right? Yeah, I just feel like if I stand back there, I'm going to be like a politician, and we know what that's like. We don't want to go there. I so much appreciate the invitation to come over. This is my fourth trip to UNCA in the last 30 years, and it's always a delight. I have so much respect for your faculty and your department and the school, and it's always a great pleasure to be here. And I'm so delighted that you came out on a rainy day, so staying in bed or wherever you happen to be at the time, and let's see where this goes. Students often wonder where we get our ideas for research. Of all of the different things that I could be studying, why would I pick a topic like overreactions to trivial events? Well, the idea for this line of research came one day while I was eating lunch in a Wendy's restaurant. Sitting there by myself eating, and I hear a man shouting behind me. In fact, he's not just shouting, he's ranting and raving. And I assume that when I turn around, I'm going to see this wild-eyed, bearded, disheveled, homeless guy, some schizophrenic, ranting at somebody. But when I turn around, he's a very attractive, well-dressed businessman in a three-piece suit, and he's waving his hamburger at the woman behind the counter, and he's shouting at her. He's saying she's too stupid to work in Wendy's. He wants to talk to the manager. He's going to get her fired. And finally, in disgust, he sort of tosses his hamburger. He doesn't actually throw it at her, but he just tosses it across the counter. The whole place is packed. It's lunchtime. Everybody's dead silent, trying to figure out what was the horrible thing this woman behind the counter did to the guy that made him react that way. Well, we listened to what was going on, and we finally realized what had happened. When he had ordered his hamburger, he asked not to have a pickle on it. And when it came, it had a pickle, and he lost it. So now on one hand, you say, well, the guy's imbalanced. He's lost his sense of perspective somehow. But as soon as I started thinking that, I started sort of guiltily thinking about the times that, well, yes, I too had reacted to something in a far disproportionate manner compared to the actual tangible consequences of what had happened. And I suspect everybody in here, if you think about it, have you ever overreacted? Have you ever lost it over something that even you admitted in retrospect really didn't make much of a difference? And it became intriguing to me because then I started seeing these reactions everywhere. I can't travel anywhere where I'm flying where there's not somebody losing it in an airport, shouting at the poor airline employee. People, roommate relationships, close relationships, people lose it over, you left your pants on the floor again, and they just lose it over that sort of thing. I have a friend who goes completely berserk when the cell phone company drops a call. And I'm thinking, you know, 20 years ago, you couldn't pick up a phone and talk to anybody in the world. You know, let's give this thing a break. But no, they lose it. Here's mine. Driving behind this really slow driver. It's 50 miles an hour limit, and we're going 20. And you can just feel your blood pressure go. You start boiling inside. So maybe it's not surprising a guy would lose it over a pickle on a hamburger. And every one of us has done this sort of thing, right? If you haven't, if you can say, I have never reacted more strongly than I should have, I want to see you after the talk because we're going to do a case study. Now, these kinds of normal situations, often, people might be angry that you overreacted, but nobody gets hurt. It's not a big deal. But if you dig deeper, this overreaction is the basis of some things that aren't funny. Gang violence. What do gangs fight over? Is it really important? Well, sometimes maybe, but usually it's things like, well, you walked across the street to our side, and so we're going to kill you. Seems like an overreaction to me. Squabbles in relationships. What do you fight with your close relationship partners about? As I think about it, it's mostly trivial junk. Every now and then it's something momentous and important, but usually it's squabbles over things that really don't make any difference, and it's all forgotten a day later. Road rage. You didn't let me merge into traffic the way I thought you should, so I chased you down and beat your car with a baseball bat. Child abuse. What have children done to be abused? Something momentous and awful? No, they just didn't eat their green beans like they had been told to. And instances of collective violence often occur when some group feels like they've been disparaged by another group, but the overreaction far exceeds whatever the original insult was. So here's the thing. If we were perfectly calibrated, reasonable creatures, we might imagine that if something is just a little bit bad, we would just have a small reaction to it. And if something was really bad, we would have a large reaction to it. But the class of behaviors we're going to talk about today are instances in which it's not really very bad at all, in an objective sense, but you get a strong overreaction. So we're going to be trying to understand this discrepancy between the actual magnitude of the event and the strength of the person's reactions to it. Now, after experiencing this thing in Wendy's, I thought about it for a while, and thought, well, I ought to look at the research literature and find out, is there anything that's been written about these kinds of overreactions? And the answer is, well, in general, no. Nobody's ever identified this as an interesting class of behaviors that deserves to be studied. But there were some hints in the literature about possible causes. One is the possibility that what we're seeing here is displaced aggression. For those of you who have taken introductory psychology, you probably had displaced aggression. This is where you're angered in one context. Somebody really makes you mad, but you can't express it, you can't react. Maybe it's your students, it's your professor, or it's your boss. And so you walk out and you're simmering and you're still angry, and then a little later in the day there's some event that triggers a reaction. Yes, it's annoying, but you explode, and it's really just a displaced reaction to the original frustrating event. And clearly that's perhaps part of the answer. It's also true that stressors can accumulate. So each individual stressor isn't really that big of a deal, but a little bad thing happens at 10 o'clock this morning, and at 11:15 another thing happened, and at noon there's another frustration, and then this person did that, and another person did something else. And it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. Finally, the thing that makes you lose it is in fact pretty small, but it's a series of cumulative stressors. It has occurred to me, is there really any evidence that a straw ever broke a camel's back? You know that show Mythbusters? I'd like to send that in and say we want to see a demonstration to see if we can actually get to that last straw that makes the camel collapse. But you get the idea, and I'm sure that happens as well. There's evidence in the literature that signs of disrespect, even if they don't really matter very much, can cause strong reactions. Some of the students have studied things like cultures of honor, where just being disrespected a little bit can cause strong reactions, and that's true as well. I think disrespect is a specific example of what I'm going to be talking about in a few moments. I don't think disrespect is its own big category. And there's been some suggestions that threats to self-esteem, even if they're minor, cause explosive big reactions. That's never made any sense to me. So you feel bad about yourself and you explode and overreact to other people. And in the literature they say, well, why do you do that? It's to enhance your self-esteem. I don't think this guy in Wendy's felt a bit better about himself later after he thought about what an ass he had made of himself. So that one never made any sense. But my point is there are hints in the literature of some things that cause these overreactions. So with that as a backdrop, we started to do some of our own research to try to understand what is the common denominator of all of these events. Can we find something? And that resulted in 3 failed studies. They were, yeah, and anybody who's ever done research goes, yay, because, you know, yeah, studies fail. At least they were a failure in the sense that we didn't find what we were thinking we were going to find. They were a success in that they led us into new lines of thinking. So what we originally thought is that there's something in these situations that lead people to become overly ego-involved in what they're doing. Somehow I've invested myself in not getting a pickle. I've invested my ego in you picking your things up off the floor or you driving a certain speed. So we did these 3 studies trying to find out psychologically, what does it mean really to be ego-involved? In a colloquial sense, we all kind of know what that means, but what does it really mean psychologically? And why does ego involvement lead to these excessive reactions? Well, these 3 studies failed because ego involvement didn't seem to be the central thing. Yes, in retrospect, people can say, well, I guess I got my ego involved in it. But in fact, when we looked at the determinants of these overreactions, ego involvement didn't seem to capture it. But what we did find as we analyzed these kinds of situations is that what they had in common is that people overreacted when they didn't think that they were treated the way that they deserved to be treated, in a very special way. That what they all had in common is you did something that I didn't deserve to experience. You treated me in some way that I didn't deserve. And this led to what we called the exchange rule violation hypothesis. Let me state it and let me explain it in detail, give you some examples. What this hypothesis says is that people overreact to trivial events when they perceive that others have violated fundamental rules of social exchange that underlie mutually satisfying social interactions and relationships. And this idea of a social exchange rule and the violation of a social exchange rule underlies everything I'm going to be talking about. So let me make it clear what I mean by this. All day long, we are engaged in a series of interdependent interactions with people. And what that means is that in an interdependent interaction, if you and I are interacting and it's interdependent, your outcomes in that interaction depend on what I do, and my outcomes in that interaction depend on what you do. Our outcomes are interdependent. Not all interactions are that way. If I just come in and yell at my kids and walk out, that's not interdependent. I affected their outcomes, but they didn't affect mine. It didn't go back and forth, there wasn't any kind of an exchange going on at all. So students, when you interact with a professor, it's usually an exchange relationship that you need to behave a certain way for the professor to get what they want, which is sort of satisfaction, you're learning something, and the professor has to behave a certain way so that you get what you want, an education or a higher grade or whatever it is your goal is. In close relationships, in employers and employees, in friendships, romantic relationships, there's a lot of interdependent interactions going on. Now, when we interact with each other interdependently, there are these very firm rules about how people are supposed to act. There are rules that you have to follow in order for both people to come away from the interaction feeling at least mildly satisfied. That even if I don't like how you acted, as long as you followed these rules, I can't complain very much. So what am I talking about? Well, interdependent interactions carry these obligations regarding how each person's expected to behave in order for that interaction to be satisfying. And sociologists and anthropologists and psychologists have identified a set of these social exchange rules that are pretty universal, that go across cultures. And they're things like this list. Fairness. In an interdependent relationship or interaction, it's assumed we're both going to treat each other fairly. We may not like what each other does, but as long as we're being fair about it, again, you can't complain too much. We're supposed to be reasonably honest with each other in an interdependent relationship. There's a norm of reciprocity that says if I do good things for you, you ought to be doing good things for me sooner or later. If I take you out to lunch a few times and you never pay for my lunch, well, you're breaking some kind of a social exchange rule. We're supposed to show a certain amount of concern for each other's basic needs. There's not a rule that says we have to be nice to people, I don't think. But there is a rule that says I have to show some concern for your needs. So if a student comes to me and says, oh, Dr. Leary, I can't take the test on Tuesday because my mother's been in a serious car accident, she may not live. And I go, well, you know, you got to keep your priorities straight. Do you want to get this education or not? You would have the sense that I violated some fundamental rule of social exchange. Dependability, you're supposed to do what you say you're going to do. You ought to enter interactions starting with a cooperative orientation. Let's try to figure this out. Now, we might be competitive later on, and that's fine, but generally you ought to start out on good terms. Rationality is a rule. You just can't act, you can't say and do just crazy things in interactions. You're violating a fundamental rule about how people ought to get along. You can see as you go through life, when people violate these kinds of rules, it's unsettling. It derails interactions. It undermines relationships. These things have to be followed in order for people to get along. And when they're not followed, people react strongly. They react strongly for a number of reasons. One is, a lot of times when people violate these rules, we are actually disadvantaged. That is, you could treat me unfairly, and it really does disadvantage me, takes money away from me, compromises my well-being somehow. So sometimes violating these rules really hurts us when other people do it. But even if it doesn't hurt us, we want to signal to other people that we know they're violating rules and that we're not going to tolerate it. You can't just let people break these rules and interactions with you all the time and not let them know that you're going to stand up to that or you're going to be disadvantaged in the future. And sometimes when people do this a lot and we completely lose it, it's really to threaten them, to punish them, to drive them away. You can't have a successful life if you surround yourself with people that break these rules all the time. You'll be chronically disadvantaged. So you get the idea, these rules are important. Now, how does this relate to the bigger question about why we overreact? One way to look at this is if we say, why did you react the way you did when this person behaved a certain way? What predicts the strength of how angry you got? What predicts how much that guy was upset by the pickle on his hamburger? There's really two distinct contributors to that reaction. One is, how bad were the tangible consequences? In the case of the pickle, it doesn't seem all that bad. But sometimes when people break rules, if you treat me unfairly and steal $10,000 from me, that seems like a pretty bad tangible consequence, and I'm going to be more upset. So part of the strength of your reaction is how bad was the thing, really. But on top of that, the strength of our reaction is affected by whether we believe that social exchange rules were violated. So that even if the tangible consequences were minor, even if there were no tangible consequences, we still might get a strong reaction because we're upset by the violation of these very fundamental and inviolate rules of social exchange. Get the idea where we're going with this? Everybody with me? All right. So this is where we were, finally. Hey, maybe we've begun to figure this out. Could it be that people are overreacting because of these violations of social exchange rules? It sounds plausible. Some of you may be even saying, hey, that's just common sense. My grandma could have told me that. Well, but we've got to do research to see if, in fact, those social exchange rule violations do increase people's upset and anger, irrespective of how bad the event was. And that was the goal of the first couple of studies I'm going to describe for you. In the very first study, to test this idea, we had 178 participants. We asked people to recall a situation in which they experienced negative emotion as a result of somebody else's behavior. We didn't want to say, think of a time when somebody violated a rule. That would be too leading. We assumed if we just asked people, tell us about a time that somebody else upset you, that a high percentage of those cases would involve a potential violation of a social exchange rule. We had them describe the event in detail to us, and then they answered questions about their emotional and behavioral reactions. And let me give you just a few examples so you can see the kind of crazy stuff these people reported to us. Not because this is important, just because it's kind of funny. My girlfriend made some judgmental comments about my parents. All right, would that upset you? Well, you go, well, yes. Some of you say, well, no, my parents deserve to be judged. 5 of us went to the beach. When we were about to go to sleep, I had a meltdown because I wasn't raised to share rooms with other people. This one student said that I went to a public, more liberal college, and he, my best friend, went to a private Christian college. Talking about music, he criticized Lady Gaga, who I love, and his parents agreed with him. Now, what's disturbing in a way is when you ask people, think of something that upset you that somebody else did, and this is what they come up with. I'd say they live an easy life, don't you think? I was giving a talk and asked my boyfriend to be there, but he did some menial work instead. Honey would come hear my talk and go, well, I'd like to, honey, but American Idol's on tonight. A former girlfriend found out I was seeing someone else. After a night out drinking, she asked to talk to me outside, and then she punched me in the face. So there's clear tangible consequences. That's what I mean by tangible consequence. All right, so we've got 178 of these things. Then we asked them, we wanted to know how much did they judge how bad each of these events were that they were reporting. Number one, what did they think the tangible consequences were? And number two, to what extent did they think there were violations of social exchange rules? Because again, we want to know about the independent contributions of those two things. So they rated the degree to which the event resulted in negative tangible consequences, and I'll show you how we did that in just a moment. And we also asked them the degree to which the event involved violations of social exchange rules. We did a pilot study to come up with a list of possible tangible consequences, categories of tangible consequences. And what we mean by tangible is that these are events that inherently disadvantage people, inherently undermine people's well-being, that these are things that naturally cause people distress. They're not symbolic things. These are things that really compromise how well you're doing at that very moment. So we had them rate, to what extent did this thing this person did affect your money or financial well-being, from not at all to extremely? It affected your performance at work or school. Where that one came from was because one student said they had loaned their notes to another student the day before a test. The student was supposed to copy them and bring them back so they could study themselves. They didn't bring them back. So did it affect that? That's a tangible consequence if somebody does that. Your safety, your physical well-being, your property or possessions, safety and well-being of people you care about, your ability to have something you desire, to do something that you want, the degree to which other people accept or like you, how other people view or evaluate you, your relationships with other people, how much fun or pleasure do you have. These are tangible things, and they have tangible consequences. We also asked them to rate the behavior that they described according to these things. To what extent was the behavior unfair, selfish, unethical, immoral, inconsiderate, unreasonable, disrespectful, dishonest, shows lack of concern, irresponsible, uncooperative? These tap into those social exchange rules. These things by themselves don't have any consequences. Again, they may tick you off, but I could treat you unfairly, and it didn't really have any consequences for you. I mean, I could try to treat you unfairly. In any of these things, it's like shooting at somebody and missing. I could do something bad, but it didn't have any tangible consequences. I could try to be selfish, but in fact, it didn't make any difference to you. So these things are not tangible. These things are violations of social exchange rules. So we want to test the impact of both of these categories of things on the strength of people's reactions. One problem in doing that is that the ratings of the tangible consequences and ratings of the rule violations are correlated with each other. The reason is, the worse the thing is that you did to me, the more likely I'm going to assume that a rule was broken. See what I mean? And it probably was. I mean, if you really did something bad, then you probably did break a rule, and more minor things, the rule's not broken as much. So what we want to do is we're going to have to take that relationship out of this statistically. And some of you will understand this when I get to it, and some of you won't. But if you just understand, statistically, we need to separate these two so that they're not contaminated with each other. So we're going to be able to statistically remove the tangible consequences from the analysis and ask the question, do the rule violations make people angry, even if we take into consideration, just eliminate any variability that's associated with tangible consequences? Okay, let me just show you one finding from this study that I can leap off of. Of course, the prototypic reaction that we're looking at is anger. How angry was I when you criticized Lady Gaga or hit me in the face or made me sleep in a room with somebody else at the beach? How angry was I? When researchers study things, one way that they indicate the strength of a relationship is in terms of how much of the variability in the target behavior can we explain with the variables we're looking at. So let me explain this for a moment. Some of you understand this already and some of you don't. If you think about people's ratings of anger in our study, we have 178 people. They're rating how angry they were when this event happened to them. We can get a measure of how much variability in anger there is in that set of data. Some people, it was very low anger, some were moderate, some were furious. We can get a statistic. And students, if you've had statistics and you've ever calculated a variance, that's what I'm talking about. The variance or variability in anger ratings in the study. The question is, how much do these two sets of variables, tangible consequences and violations of social exchange rules, how much of the variability among the participants' ratings of anger can we account for? So that's the metric we're using. What percentage of anger can we account for with these two variables? So if we look first at the tangible consequences, people's ratings of how bad the event really was, we only account for 9.7% of the variability in anger. 10% of the variance in anger can be accounted for by how bad the thing really was in the eyes of the participant, which isn't a whole lot when you think about it. And then what the analysis does is it removes that amount. It says, okay, we've accounted for some variability due to the tangible consequences. People were more angry, the worse the tangible consequences. Can we account for more of the variability in anger in our sample by looking at the violations of social exchange rules? And when you do that, violations of social exchange rules account for another 35% of the variability. And what this really says is that if we're accounting for how angry people are, we can account for 4 times more of their anger by the fact that a rule was violated rather than by how bad the thing really was in their eyes. That is, I have to admit that criticizing Lady Gaga was not that bad, but it still was sort of a violation for you to criticize my favorite artist somehow publicly in front of your parents and for them to agree and you guys to gang up on me, and that's what made me angry. So there's some evidence here that the social exchange rule violations are causing people to experience anger irrespective of the tangible consequences which we've removed statistically. You might be wondering, well, where's the rest of that variability? Why don't we have 100% here? Well, a lot of other things affect how people how angry they are in a particular situation. Some of these people were just angrier people. Depending on the kind of relationship they had with the person when the event happened. Maybe it depends on how long ago it was and how fresh it is in their memory. Who knows? Can't explain 100% of the variability in anger in one study. We're just interested in 2 possible things: how bad was the event and how much of a social exchange rule violation was there. Does that make sense to you? So it showed us we might be on the right track, that if violations of social exchange rules make people mad even when tangible consequences are eliminated from the picture. Now, as we read these things, what we found is a very high percentage of them involved being upset in close relationships, romantic relationships of one kind or another. It's almost like romantic relationships are a hotbed for overreactions when things don't make much of a difference. Think about your own relationships over the years. Again, people get upset when people leave their things on the floor. It's only a pair of socks, but boy, your partner can ruin the day. First thing in the morning, how many times have I told you you don't got to pick up your socks and, when you go to bed at night, and just ruins the day. Are you looking at her butt? Tangible consequences? No, I don't see any tangible consequence problem there. Rule violations? Hell yeah. Yeah, you don't violate that rule. You told me you were going to be here at 6 o'clock and pick me up, and it's 10 after 6, and where were you? You made me wait 10 minutes. And of course the person's saying, it's 10 minutes. What's the big deal? You have a big fight about it. Tangible consequences of men leaving the toilet seat up. Well, yeah, minor tangible consequences. It can provoke big reactions. I think most men in the group would say, if this was really a serious thing, let me show you how easy it is to solve this serious problem. Right? I think most men would say, if we can solve the problem that easily, that's not a big deal. But people do fight about this kind of thing. Why? It's a rule violation. I've told you that this bothers me, honey, when you leave the seat up and you need to put the seat down again, and after 20 years you're still not doing it. That kind of shows you don't care enough about me. You don't show a concern for my well-being. This is my shower stall at home. And that purple thing is a towel. I've been married for 33 years. And about 3 times a week in those 33 years, towels mysteriously appear flung over the edge of the shower stall when my wife finishes taking a shower. Even though there's a towel rack right there on that white door, I've given up bringing it up. Tangible consequences, I'll show you how petty I am. I sat down once, after about 20 years of this. I nagged her for the first couple of months, and it was clear this wasn't going anywhere. Please hang it up. Show some. It's a rule. You pick up after yourself. After about 20 years, I thought, well, I'll get empirical evidence for what the tangible consequences are. I timed how long it took me to hang her towel up. It's like 2.7 seconds. And I thought, well, this happens about 1/3 of the time, so multiply that by 100 times a year, let's say, in 20 years, and it added up to like 17 minutes of time over 20 years. I didn't have a case. But people have fights over those kinds of things. So in the second study, we wanted to do the same kind of thing we did in the first study, but look at people just in close relationships and ask them about what their partners did that upset them. So we had 200 participants, wide age range, 18 to 67 years old, all kinds of relationships, married, life partnership, engaged, dating, and they'd been in their relationship between 2 months and 40 years. So this was a community sample. Again, just because they're funny, a few of the examples. He will burp continuously here at home, but he never does when we're out in public or when he's at work. Since he can control it while we're out, he ought to be able to control it here. Tangible consequences? Well, not exactly, but there are some rule violations going on. He's never ready on time. That was probably the most common. And that can have tangible consequences. You can miss out on things, miss part of the play or the concert or whatever. But a lot of times it's not tangible. She talks about her crazy psychic beliefs. She believes in mediums and talking to spirits. I have a very scientific mind, and I think she's crazy. And somehow he didn't know this before they got together. When her dog chewed up my mom's ashes, I was furious. That's an interesting one from the standpoint of thinking about whether there's any tangible consequences. For the dog, maybe, I don't know. My partner's extremely messy. This is why after dating for over 10 years, we don't live together. It's a secret to a happy relationship. I think my partner is close to perfect. One thing that bothers me is he's not so clean and organized. Close to perfect. As soon as I saw that, I thought, these people have not been together very long. I went back into the raw data just out of curiosity. This is a person from the couple who was together for 2 months. And I thought, well, okay, let's come back in 2 years and let's see what this looks like. Okay, again, we had them rate the degree to which whatever it was they reported had tangible consequences along that same set of variables that would affect your financial well-being, your safety, what you wanted to do, all of that stuff. We also had them rate this, whatever they said, whatever they reported, in terms of the degree to which it violated social exchange rules. So we're going to look at the data just a little bit differently here, because I want to make a point. We measured some things besides anger. How hurt were you that your partner did this thing? How sad did it make you that they would do this? We also asked them about relational value. To what extent did this thing your partner did make you feel like they valued your relationship less than you would like for them to? Because I think that's one thing that we infer when somebody doesn't hang their towel up on a regular basis. Okay, so this R squared in this table, this is a percentage of variance again, just like in that earlier graph. So we're asking, what percentage of variability in each of these things can we account for with the tangible consequence ratings and the ratings of perceived social exchange rule violations? So the way this works, we put tangible consequences into the analysis first. We can account for 22% of the variability in anger with people's ratings of tangible consequences. Then we say, let's remove that variability. Can we account for variability irrespective of tangible consequences with social exchange rule violations? The answer is yes. Another 17% can be predicted by social exchange rule violations. It's again showing that you've got two different things going on here. But let's do it the other way. Let's put social exchange rule violations into the equation first and say, let's see how much variability they'll account for, and then is there anything left over for the actual magnitude of the tangible consequences to predict? And if you do that, something very interesting comes out. That once you consider people's violations of social exchange rules, accounting for 37% of the variability, how bad they say the thing really was almost doesn't matter at all, counts for 2%. You'll see that in both cases, on both sides, it adds up to 39% of the variability being accounted for, but it gives a slightly different picture about which one is really the most important, and it begins to look like the social exchange rule violations are overall more important. How much did you feel hurt? Did this hurt your feelings when your partner did this? Again, tangible consequences. The worse the thing was you did to me, the more it hurt my feelings. Okay, that's fine. But also, the more of a violation it was of a social exchange rule, the more it hurt my feelings. If I do it the other way, once you account for the fact that the partner violated a rule, then how bad the thing was didn't really matter very much, 5% of the variance. Exactly the same pattern with sadness. And if you ask them, to what extent did this make you feel your partner did not value your relationship as much as you would like? Yes, the worse the thing was, the more I felt like you don't value me, the greater the violation, the more the rule violation, the more I feel like you don't value me. But again, the effect seems to be predominantly due to the violation of the rules rather than the tangible consequences. So I've shown this diagram right here several times, but this is really misleading. What it really ought to look like is this. That when you look at people becoming angry because of what other people have done that's affected them, the anger is much more due to the violations of the rules than to the actual magnitude of the infraction. Are you still with me? Yes. All right. I am what's called an experimental social psychologist by training. And what that means is I'm never really quite happy when I study something until I can take the phenomenon into a controlled laboratory study to take a look at it under controlled conditions. Here we're asking for people to report on things that happen to them. We're getting ratings of their emotions and ratings of violations and ratings of tangible outcomes. That's informative. But I'd like to be able to study it under a controlled circumstances to make sure we've got this thing nailed down. So we did an experiment to explore this a little bit more. What we did here is we brought participants in. These were college students participating as part of a class requirement. And they worked with a Confederate. Now, the Confederate's not somebody who fought for the South in the Civil War here. Confederate is a researcher or an accomplice of a researcher who's pretending to be another participant. So we have participants come in, and here's another person they think is a participant, but it's not. It's a researcher pretending to be a participant, a Confederate. And what they're told they're going to do is they're going to work together to build an abstract design out of Legos. Everybody knows what Legos are. There's little pieces of plastic, little bricks to build things with. And we told them your final product is not going to be evaluated. We wanted to make sure they didn't think it was important they do it a certain way or at a certain level of quality. We're just going to watch how you guys do this together. So what we want you to do is you're going to each have a giant pile of Legos in front of you and a platform to build something on. And you're going to take turns, taking 4 of your pieces and building, and the next person's going to put 4 pieces, and then you're going to put 4 pieces. And you're going to keep on doing this, and the only rule is you can't talk. In fact, turn off your cell phone, don't talk to each other, and make sure whatever piece you put on it, for each piece you put on has to touch another piece that's on there. And we're going to observe this and have you rate the whole exercise. And they built some really interesting looking Lego things with people and windows and bricks and roads and little stuff that I found up in the attic that my kids left over from years ago. We've randomly assigned participants to one of 2 experimental conditions. In one of those conditions, the Confederate, pretending to be the subject, was told to just act like a subject would normally act in this setting. Just follow the rules, put your pieces on there, don't say anything, let the other person put their pieces on there, and keep going back and forth. Act normal. In the other experimental condition, the Confederate was trained to violate social exchange rules at a few points during this exercise. So we wanted to see, how do people react to somebody who violates rules that don't make any difference We made sure it wasn't going to affect the outcome of this Lego building task. So the Confederate was trained to violate social exchange rules at designated times. There's a point at which, now remember, they've each got a big pile of about 200 pieces. The Confederate looks over and spies a piece from the other person's pile, and they poach it. Doesn't hurt a thing. The other person's got more than enough pieces they'll ever use. But you can sort of feel like some kind of a rule was violated there. Some kind of a selfishness rule or not maintaining boundaries rule or something. Even worse, there's one point at which the Confederate moves a couple of pieces the other person had put on. Doesn't matter. There are no tangible consequences. Zero. It doesn't matter. But would that kind of piss you off if somebody did that? What are you doing? Moving the pieces I put on there. We told them to turn their cell phone off, but at one point the Confederate while the participants putting their pieces on, the Confederate starts texting somebody and, loses a few seconds before they realize it's their turn again. Again, it doesn't matter. Quality of this thing doesn't matter. How many pieces you play doesn't matter. And then had the gall to be unnecessarily impatient during the next person's turn, and at a point appeared sort of disinterested in the whole thing, was kind of staring around the room while the other person placed their pieces. There does seem to be a social exchange rule that's in an interaction. You have to maintain at least some minimal level of attention to what the other person's saying and doing. So afterwards, the researcher comes in and says, thank you very much. We want you now to complete some questionnaires. And the participant would rate the individual, rate their own reactions to this whole thing. Well, the first thing we wanted to know, we wanted to make sure that the participants who were randomly assigned to the group where there were going to be exchange rule violations actually picked up that rules were being violated. So we had all participants rate to what extent did the other person do these things, and it's the same list. They were selfish, they didn't show a concern for me, they were disrespectful or whatever. And so all this finding shows we've got the two conditions participants were randomly assigned to, a control condition where the Confederate acted like a normal person, and the exchange rule violation where the Confederate engaged in a few violations of social exchange rules. This simply shows that participants did code that behavior as involving the violation of rules, and that was important to even run the study. And then we have three major measures. How angry were you during this whole thing? They rated themselves on a number of emotions, anger being one. How positive or negative were your feelings toward this other person, the Confederate? How much do you like the Confederate? And what you can see is that in the exchange rule violation condition, people were angrier, they had more negative feelings about the Confederate, liked the Confederate less, and they actually had more antisocial urges. We developed this measure where we listed, I think it was 8 negative and 8 positive behaviors. And we said, we told you you couldn't say anything, and of course you weren't going to behave in a particular way in this interaction, but did you at any point have the urge? To what extent did you have the urge? And we had positive and negative things. Positive things, did you have the urge to compliment the other participant, to make a joke, to be nice? And negative things like to shout at the other person, curse at the other person, slap the other person. And the participants who experienced the rule violations admitted they had more antisocial urges that they hadn't acted on. All right, so none of this is surprising, really. I mean, every one of you can say, well, yes, if I sat there across the table from somebody who violated these rules, I'd be angry, I'd feel negatively, I wouldn't like them, and I wanted to slap them. Okay. The important thing is not just that the rule caused these reactions. We wanted to be able to show that the violation of the rule, the condition, caused the reaction through people's perceptions that rules were being violated. For those of you not familiar with this kind of thing, let me try to explain it. We have an experimental manipulation here. We have Confederates acting normally, Confederates breaking rules. We already know, I just showed you, that results in differences in anger, and that's what's indicated here. The little asterisks show that that's statistically significant. People were more angry in the condition where the Confederate violated the rules. But the question is that relationship mediated by perceiving that exchange rule violations had occurred? That is the mediating thing going on in the person's brain is, this person acted this way, I'm interpreting it as a violation of a rule, and that's what's making me angry. And it's that interpretation is essential to this whole process. If it is, when you stick it in this kind of model, that bottom arrow ought to become non-significant, because it's not a direct relationship from the experimental condition to the emotion. It's mediated through what's going on in the participant's brain, interpreting this as a violation of rules. And when you do that, you find that it's completely mediated by the perception of social exchange rule violations. That is what's leading to the anger. Your behavior is interpreted in a certain way, and it makes me angry because you violated social exchange rules. You find exactly the same thing. You might not notice I changed the slide right there, and it looks the same because you get the same effect exactly for those antisocial urges. Why did they have antisocial urges? It wasn't just because the Confederate acted wacky. It was because they interpreted that wackiness as a violation of social exchange rules. So here in a controlled condition, we're getting the same effect. So we feel fairly certain that we can help to explain these overreactions. In a sense, they're not overreactions. They're only overreactions with respect to the tangible consequences. Yes, it's completely crazy to go nuts over this little thing, but in a larger sense, it's a reaction to people violating fundamental social rules. Let me make 3 other points, and then I'm going to close. One thing we noticed as we were working on this, and I would like to have time to explore this in a study or two, and I haven't done it. It seemed to us that people sometimes react more strongly to inconsequential than consequential events, which is paradoxical. They're minor violations. It's a sock on the floor, it's a towel, it's a pickle. But what occurred to us is that rule violations are perceived as more serious the easier it is to stop the offending behavior. If it's easy for the person not to violate the rule, it's more galling that they violate it. It's easy to hang up your damn towel. How easy is it not to put a pickle on a hamburger? It's negative easy. You had to go out of your way to give me something that I didn't want, right? So I think sometimes we react more strongly to more piddly things because we perceive it would have been easier not to violate that rule. The other thing that's really interesting, and we have begun to pursue this in a study, but I don't have data on it. Obviously, the victims and perpetrators in these situations view the situation much differently. The victim is incensed. They're furious. You were 10 minutes late. You didn't hang up your towel. You gave me a pickle. Perpetrators are going, oh, I'm really sorry, but my God, it was only 10 minutes. It's just a towel. It's just a pickle. I think the reason that that difference occurs in perspective is that the perpetrators are focused on the tangible outcomes. They look at what they did and they say, it wasn't a big deal. What are you so upset about? But the victim isn't really focused on the tangible outcome. The victim's focused upon the violation of the social exchange rule, which is potentially serious. Even if it's very minor, the fact that you continue to leave your dirty underwear on the floor for 40 years is really a violation that shows that you don't care about what I want. And we've started a study in which we're trying to reverse victims and perpetrators' perspectives on events. That is, get victims to think about, was there really anything bad done here, tangible consequences? And getting perpetrators to think about the social exchange rule violations. It ought to bring their interpretations of the event closer together. I don't think we'll ever get them to see eye to eye, but it ought to sort of moderate the effect. All right, let me wrap up. People respond disproportionately to negative events to the extent they perceive that others have violated important social rules. In many of the examples I've used, I've sort of made fun of these reactions because they seem so absurd, including many of my own. But I want to make the point, I don't want you to go away thinking that I'm somehow saying you should never react to something that does not have a tangible consequence. Sometimes these strong reactions are reasonable, that you have to assert yourself. Again, I'll use the example of somebody shooting at you and missing. Right? There's no tangible consequences. So the shooter could just say, hey, no harm done, don't worry about it. And you say, what? So there are times when you need to stand up and say, enough's enough. I mean, I understand it's not a big deal, but you're always late. Please, start trying to be on time. Please pick up your stuff, whatever it is. These violations connote to us that other people are poor social exchange partners and we don't want to have to deal with them. We've got to put an end to those kinds of behaviors. But often these overreactions are neither reasonable nor useful. Now, this is one area in which I've done research in which I have taken to heart some of the things I've learned. I sometimes have students say, Dr. Leary, you've been doing this for over 3 decades, studying all kinds of stuff. Has this made you more successful socially? Has this made you a better friend and coworker and relationship partner? And by and large, I say no. It has given me a way to understand what went wrong in interactions and in relationships. It's given me a vocabulary to talk about the processes involved, but by and large, I don't know it's made me any better at anything. This kind of has, because what it's led me to do is when I encounter a situation where I can tell that I'm really reacting to something, and I can kind of tell it's somewhat disproportionate, I sort of do a 2-stage thing that I'll recommend to you if you have the same problem. First, I ask myself, am I reacting mostly to the tangible consequences or mostly to a social exchange rule violation? How much of my reaction is which? Most of the time, it ends up being a social exchange rule violation mostly, but sometimes something tangible really did happen that's upset me. But that's the first decision. Tangible, exchange rule violation. Now, if it is a social exchange rule violation, I ask myself, is this a violation that I ought to react to? In a lot of cases, the answer is absolutely not, or at least don't get inflamed about it. Yes, if you want to go up and say, excuse me, I asked not to have a pickle. Could I please have a, I know, it's okay, just, give me one without a pickle. Yeah, do that, but I'm not going to scream about it because it doesn't serve the purpose of correcting the behavior in a way. I'm not going to have an ongoing relationship with this person behind the counter. I don't have to correct their behavior for the long term. I just need to get my hamburger without a pickle. There are other cases, though, where you have to put your foot down. And sometimes you might even have to kind of throw a little bit of a fit to get your point across. But it makes me feel good to be able to make that decision consciously instead of it having this knee-jerk reaction, which so many of us do, that when these things happen, we don't distinguish the tangible from the social exchange rule violation, and we act like it's all really a gigantic injustice against us when really it didn't make any difference that I got slowed down by 20 seconds going to work because somebody was driving too slowly. And I started realizing how little the tangible consequences are that sometimes push my buttons. And you can think in your own mind about your own life and the things that push your buttons and how much they're tangible versus how much they're social exchange rule violations. Again, I appreciate you coming out, and I'll take a few questions. I do have to thank my 2 graduate students and the other undergraduate researchers involved. Nobody can do research without a team, and I want to thank them.
We have some time for some questions. Mark, if I just can remind you to paraphrase the question.
Sure. Thank you. Yes?
3 things, and you can respond to them in any order you want. One is, in a culture where a significant percent of the population, for various reasons, is sleep deprived, the impact of sleep deprivation for whatever reasons on how you react is one question.
Let me take them each one at a time, because I won't remember the first one by the time you get to the third one. All right, he's asking about the impact of sleep deprivation. There are obviously other factors that can make people overreact. Sleep deprivation is absolutely one of them. Crowding and heat and frustration. There's lots of other things that lower the threshold at which we react to events in general. And so I'm sure that's a gigantic main effect that plays in here. Absolutely right.
And I'm really on the ascension. I'm saving the best for last. Number 2 is there's a ton of research that demonstrates that the level of empathy in the culture is dropping. And so we have less appreciation and understanding and looking at me versus you in an issue. Your thoughts on that?
So your prediction would be that these situations may be more pronounced than they were 40 or 50 years ago. That people with lower empathy, that we don't as easily think about, well, why might you have done that thing that I'm interpreting as a rule violation, which it kind of is. Maybe you had a really good reason for doing it. I absolutely do think that somebody with greater empathy would at least stop to think about, was it a good reason why you violated the rule? I think that's a good point. I had not thought of that. That's good.
And the third thing, which I think is most important, is in a culture where time is perceived as a commodity. As an example for the younger students here, I started college in 1964 during the Bronze Age. And my mother would say, your grandmother is helping subsidize your education. You need to write her this week. If you write her on Monday, she'll get it by Friday, and she'll respond to you next week. Students today, it's, you know, would you contact your grandmother? Mom, do you want me to call her, or do you want me to text her? Because I don't want to talk to her. Can I text her? And can I do it right now? The sense of how time has been squeezed by, you don't want to sit at a stoplight for 30 seconds because everything is so instantaneous as now.
I like your questions focusing on the cultural changes, which I have not thought much about, but you're absolutely correct. Time, the wasting of time begins to feel like a tangible consequence. And it can be sometimes. And I've treated it that way until I start thinking, well, 15 seconds shouldn't matter too much. It'd be really interesting to think about, are there archival data anywhere where you could go back and look at frequency of overreactions somehow, but going back 50 or 60 years would be fascinating. Those are great questions. I have not considered the cultural element enough. Thanks. Yes?
To the degree that two people have different exchange rules, how does that influence your study, and have you studied it ahead of time before you throw them together? And more importantly, if they do have different exchange rules, what's the probability they can reach harmony and agreement on a neutral set?
That is the question is, what happens in relationships when people have two different sets of social exchange rules? That they value different ones of those rules differentially. And we do. I mean, each one of us puts more or less emphasis on all of those. That is a great question. I share what I think is your hunch, is that to the degree that people have very different priorities and social exchange rules, there are going to be more problems. Because I don't see this thing I'm doing as a violation of a rule at all, but you do. We have not looked at that. I think that is a great idea. I would have to think that that would be an important determinant of relationship success, and I don't know that Ann Weber could tell us at some point whether relationship researchers have ever looked at anything like those kinds of rules. That's great. Thanks.
I put this gentleman's comment with that gentleman's comment and put them together, because what I see in my own life is that there's been a shift in generational agreement about social exchange rules. For example, I'm an older generation, so I think that if someone comes to your home for dinner, they need to either send you an email or call you and thank you. If you give them a gift, they need to call you or at least send you an email, if not a thank you note. I find that that doesn't seem to be an exchange rule anymore. There's a whole lot of these, what I consider to be exchange rules that I see younger people aren't agreeing to.
Yes, she's talking about particularly about sort of rules about showing appreciation. When somebody invites you to dinner or sends you a rule, it did used to be at the time I was growing up as well, you would always immediately, thank the person. And if you didn't, it was a violation of some kind of a rule of appreciation, I suspect. My sons, who are in their late 20s, early 30s, I don't think they ever do that kind of thing to each other and their friends, and nobody thinks anything about it. It's not a rule violation anymore. So some of these rules seem fundamental to social interaction. Some of them are more culturally specific, and we can see the culturally specific part changing. That's a good observation.
Not putting the pickle on the sandwich. You're interacting with a stranger, and so there is no social exchange in terms of relationship. It's the relationship with you and the person behind the counter. And I think sometimes it's easier, perhaps, to have a meltdown with that because there are no consequences of a personal nature.
Okay, her point is if you're talking about reacting to a stranger, the airline clerk, the person who puts the pickle on the hamburger, that you're not really in a relationship. You're not in an interdependent relationship. It's still an interdependent interaction. I get what I want if you do your job, and you get what I want, my money, if I do it. So it is two-sided. But you're absolutely right. There are no relationship consequences if I melt down. The other puzzling thing, I agree with that. The other puzzling thing is there's no motive for me to melt down. If the meltdown is partly to stop the behavior for the future so you don't disadvantage me later, which is what I kind of think the meltdown is supposed to convey in the context of a relationship, there's no reason for me to overreact that way. If we were really rational, you'd just simply say, give me a hamburger without a pickle, and she'd go, well, here it is, and thank you very much, and it's over. The meltdown doesn't serve any function except for the fact it's just a violation of a rule. So it's kind of puzzling. It's got two sides to it, and I don't know why it goes one way as opposed to the other. Ann.
I have been amazed to be the next person in line after Pickle Man and airport crazy and all that. And I must say that what I've observed in my own life narrative is that I pay attention to how I can get something out of that, learn something from it, like shock the hell out of people by writing them a thank you note when they are friends of mine and weren't expecting a thank you note. Or thanking someone who's a customer service representative and just saying, I know you've been really patient, I appreciate that, and write a formal letter, and later I get a letter from the personnel manager thanking me for writing a thank you letter. And what I found overall is that whether or not this is leading to a cultural change, it certainly made a difference in my sense of whether or not I am living a better life. So maybe there is that angle for it as well.
So you're almost talking about sort of a remediative thing. When you've witnessed this sort of thing, can you sort of undo the damage, particularly for the person who's been, and I think a lot of us have done that. You've seen a functionary of some kind be berated by a customer, and when it's your turn, you make some kind of a comment to try to lighten it up, to make them feel better. We know you're overworked, this is tough, that other person overreacted. And it is, it's a nice sort of thing to do.
Feel like they feel better, and then I feel better too.
Yeah.
And that I mean, it's really an amazing experience to find that something so, you say, why get so upset about something so little? Why does something so little then make me feel
Make you feel good, yeah. Why? Because you fulfilled the social exchange rule of helping somebody out. Other thoughts or questions or observations? Yes.
Look at age from the respect that I know I've mellowed a lot in how I react to things. And it's like, from the perspective of so many years as opposed to 20 years.
Yes. Yeah, the comment has to do with age-related changes. She says she's mellowed with time, and I feel like I have too. You also do hear the people who are, they've put up with crap their whole life, and by the time that they're, 70 or 80, they're just not going to take it anymore. They're not going to stand for anything. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to study developmentally why people gravitate and mellow, or they become even more sensitive to these violations. Because one of my grandparents, just began to be completely intolerant of anything that was a rule violation. And her comment is maybe it was dementia. Okay. We didn't consider that in our study. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also important to note that, we live in a very customer service-based society, so we are taught that I'm always right.
Yes.
In a business setting, so I think that contributes a lot to overreactions as
Extremely interesting. Yeah, she says we live in a customer-oriented society where we're sort of taught the customer is always right, and that person's there to, serve us. When really, the real fact is it's an interdependent relationship. I have a role to play too in how I treat them, and they have a role in how they treat me, and we have gotten really one-sided in that. That's a really nice observation. Let me get one more, and then if other people want to come up and chat, I'll be happy to stay here, but I know some of you have places to go and things to do. And I see it here in the back. Yes?
Yeah, the cross-cultural. So, you can get in trouble if you go to another country because you haven't got a clue as to the culture and you use your left hand in India when you're reading, or things like that. Are there any either principles or characteristics of principles of these social exchange rules that are thought to be universal, or is there great diversity and contrariness in cultures characteristics?
I think the rules that I have listed here, most people would assume are universal or nearly universal. But how you display them, how you display respect or concern for other people or reciprocity is very different in different cultures. So the rule's there, but you could still mess up by doing it wrong. So yeah, your questions about culture are great. I'm going to go ahead and stop because I can see people are needing to leave and you're getting antsy. Thanks again for coming, and I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk.